Let's learn how to play against one of the most popular defenses to the king's pawn opening. Start by moving your pawn to the square e4. I have many different ways to reply on the first move. In this lesson, we'll look at the French defense. This modest move is the French defense. When playing against it, you should occupy the center by moving your pawn to the square d4. Whenever you can occupy the center with this pawn duo on the squares e4 and d4, it is usually an excellent way to begin the game. In 1834, chess players in London played a correspondence game against players in Paris. The Parisians employed this defense with black, and it has been called the French defense ever since. Advance your pawn to the square e5. Pushing this pawn forward is a great way to play against the French defense. This is called the advance variation. My move attacks your pawn center. Move your pawn forward to the square c3 to defend it. The square d4 will come under enormous pressure in this opening. Let's see how both sides fight to control this central square. I developed my knight, attacking the square d4. Develop your knight and defend that square once more. Here is a bit of chess wisdom. When the center is closed, play on the wings. In this position, our pawn chains block the center, so the play will mostly happen on the sides of the board. It's hard to develop my light-squared bishop in the French defense because it is trapped behind the pawns in the center, making it a bad bishop. Move your bishop to the square e2. Next, I will develop my queen to attack the square d4. For now, the square d4 is attacked 3 times and defended 3 times, so you are safe to castle. When playing against the French defense, you can sometimes capture on the square c5 to gain the initiative. I'm going to exchange pawns now to avoid this possibility. Capture back and maintain your pawn chain in the center of the board. Your pawn on the square e5 hinders the natural development of my knight to the square f6. In the advance variation of the French defense, the black knight often uses the square e7 or even the square h6 to come into the game. Develop your knight. My queen attacks both the squares d4 and b2, preventing you from developing your dark-squared bishop just yet. Meanwhile, if I want to develop my dark-squared bishop, I will have to move my knight first. Your pawn on d4 is now attacked 3 times but only defended twice. Move your knight to attack my queen. Under threat from your knight, my queen must flee to safety. I will move her to c7, where she patrols the open file. The battle for control of this file is very important in this opening. Move your bishop to the square e3, bringing another defender to the d4 square and completing your development. I will also develop my dark-squared bishop. Move your rook to the square c1 to take control of the open c-file. Before anything further happens, I better castle. When playing against the French defense, be sure to control the square d4 and fight for the c-file. Next, let's take a deeper look at some plans in this opening. Here, you have a central pawn duo on the squares e4 and d4 set up against my French defense. My strategy in the center is to control the light squares. How should you play against my French defense? Your move grabs a space advantage in the center, preventing my knight from coming to the square f6 and trapping my bishop on the square c8 behind the pawn chain. My move attacks your center. Find a move that defends your pawn on the square d4 a second time. Very good, Marco. With your center secure, you can safely develop your pieces. Next, I will show you an example of how things could go very wrong for me quickly in this opening. Let me show you a trap that sometimes works against the French defense. This move is common in the French defense because it attacks the squares d4 and b2 at once. Ignore the threat and develop your bishop to the square d3. Count the attackers and defenders of the square d4. I have 3, while you have only 2. Let's see what happens if I try to win that pawn. Capture back with your pawn. Count the attackers and defenders again. I have 2 while you have only 1. That pawn is mine. Capture my knight with yours. Say goodbye to your knight. I have won the pawn, but here comes the trap. Move your bishop to the square b5, checking my king and revealing a threat on my queen. With my king in check, I have no time to save my queen. Before capturing my queen, take my bishop and check my king again. When I capture back with my king, I will lose the right to castle. Capture my undefended queen with yours. French defense players may fall for this trap, unaware that taking your central pawn seals their queen's fate. Let's look at another plan against the French defense next. Compare your bishops with mine. While yours have open diagonals, my bishop on d7 is trapped behind its own pawns and unable to enter the game. This is called a bad bishop. My bad bishop on the square d7 is a burden that every French defense player must bear, but it prevents you from playing the trap that we just learned. How can you attack my queen and resolve the tension in the center? This move is a blunder, because it allows my queen to capture your pawn that is no longer defended. Look for a capture that resolves the tension in the center instead. My bad bishop on the square d7 is a burden that every French defense player must bear, but it prevents you from playing the trap that we just learned. How can you attack my queen and resolve the tension in the center? By releasing the tension in the center, you no longer have to be concerned about losing the center pawn. I captured back with my bishop, forming a queen and bishop battery against your king. What should you do? Well done, Marco. Remember that releasing the tension in the center is a simple solution to the pressure on the square d4. Next, we'll review a different option. Here is another plan that works well against the French defense. First, play your pawn to the square a3 and then push your b-pawn forward on the next turn. My knight has 2 ways to enter the game, but a knight on the edge of the board is usually not a good idea. So, I'll play my knight towards the center. I moved it to the square e7, blocking my dark-squared bishop from developing. Continue with your plan and advance your pawn to the square b4. I cannot allow you to capture my pawn on the square c5, so this time I must release the tension. Do you see the best way to capture back? Pushing your a-pawn and b-pawn gains space on the queen side. With my bishop unable to move, I will instead develop my rook to the only open file. While you have a solid space advantage, I was first to control the c-file. Let's look at another trap next. In this game, you played the king's pawn opening, I played the French defense, and you responded with the advance variation. Now play a move that prepares pawn to the square b4 on the next turn. Playing this move is the right idea, but first you must play a move that prepares it. If you play pawn to the square b4 immediately, I will capture and win a pawn. In this game, you played the king's pawn opening, I played the French defense, and you responded with the advance variation. Now play a move that prepares pawn to the square b4 on the next turn. Nice work, Marco. You're ready to play pawn to the square b4 next. My knight has gone to the edge of the board. Should you take it with your bishop? Bravo! It's best to ignore my knight and continue with your plan. What should you play now? Very good, Marco. Remember that taking the knight on the square h6 is bad if the black queen can capture your b-pawn. Onwards. In this example, there is tension along the open c-file between my rook on the square c8 and yours on c1. It would be advantageous for you to place a knight on the square c5, but how can it get there? Nice move. By chasing my queen with your knight, your control over the c-file increases. And now what should you play? Very good. Your knight attacked my queen and then jumped to a fantastic square. Remember this maneuver. Next, we will look at another idea on the c-file. Moving your knight to the square c5 looks like a good move here. What is another piece you should bring to the c-file? A move of strength. Your rook on the open c-file pins my knight to my queen, compelling me to prevent your b-pawn from advancing further. Now what should you play? Well played. By combining these ideas of chasing my queen and bringing your rook to the c-file, you have achieved an excellent position. Next, let's look at how you can disrupt some of my plans. My knight on the square f5 is my most active piece. Do you see how to dislodge it from its perch? This move does attack my knight, but it invites it to capture on the square d4. Keep looking. My knight on the square f5 is my most active piece. Do you see how to dislodge it from its perch? My knight is forced to flee the center. Though it looks odd, this g-pawn push is a thematic idea in the French advance to attack a knight on the square f5. Your g-pawn controls the square f5 and may later attack my kingside. Next, let's look at a similar example on the other side of the board. Here is a familiar scenario in the French advance. Your pawns give you a space advantage, but my pieces are more active. Activating my rook along the open c-file seems like a good move. Do you see how to disrupt my position by dislodging my knight from the square c6? Bingo! If I want to avoid losing material, my knight must flee. Your pawn on the square b5 is now attacked twice, but only defended once. How can you defend it a second time? Well played, Marco. By dislodging my knight, you gained more space on the queenside and further restricted my pieces. Let's look at the next example. In this example, I'll show you how to play against the French defense if the position becomes close. As before, move your pawn forward to the square a3. My next move will close the position up tightly like a zipped zipper. My plan is to clamp down on the square b3. Develop your knight to the square d2 to anticipate this. My light square strategy is quite dangerous. If I can get a stranglehold on all of the light squares on the queen side of the board, then you will struggle to open the position. Let me show you a clever move that responds to my plan. Move your rook over to the square b1. If I continue with my plan and play my knight to the square b3, there was. Then you can capture my knight with yours. Suppose I capture back with my queen. Should you exchange queens by capturing mine with yours? Exchanging queens is advantageous for you because when I recapture, my pawn chain will be broken. Do you see how to attack and win my undefended pawn on the square b3? Nice move. Next you will capture my pawn on the square b3 and emerge from the opening with an advantage. Let's take it from the beginning and test your memory. What was your first move in this lesson? I will play the solid French defense by moving my king's pawn forward one square to the square e6. What should you play now? Very good. When you are able to occupy the center squares on the first two moves with this pawn duo, it is usually an excellent way to begin the game. My move continues with my light square strategy in the center and directly challenges your pawn duo. How should you continue? Playing the advanced variation, I see. How should you continue now? Nice move. The French advance is defined by the clash of our two pawn chains in the center of the board. Okay, time to develop a piece. My knight move attacks your central pawn on the square d4. How should you respond? Yes, so that's it. Your knight occupies its natural square and defends the pawn on the square d4 too. Do you remember the move that we reviewed in this position? A shrewd move. I see you're preparing to play your knight's pawn to the square b4 next. Well, perhaps I will prevent that. Now if you play your pawn to the square b4, I could capture en passant. My plan is to clamp down on the light squares of the board. What's yours? So, you're not going to let me take control of the light squares without a fight? Let's see about that. How should you continue here? You're demonstrating a subtle understanding of the position. Very impressive. Your turn. That move does not allow you to castle on the next turn. Which one would? Your turn. I think I will play my rook to the c-file, just in case it opens up later in the game. How can you complete your development? Excellent move. Now your development is complete. Remember these thematic plans and you'll have success in the king's pawn opening against the French defense. Kudos on completing this lesson on how to play against the French defense. Onwards.